Welcome back. Tonight, we're stepping into the bedroom where nightmares become real, where a child's fears manifest as towering mechanical horrors, and where the line between dream and reality blurs into something far more sinister. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 stands as perhaps the darkest entry in the entire franchise, not because of jump scares or monster designs, but because of what it represents beneath the surface. This is a story about family trauma, psychological experimentation, and the weight of guilt that can haunt someone for a lifetime. From the crying child who trembles at the sight of animatronics, to the nightmare creatures that stalk through hallways, from hidden experiments conducted in underground facilities to mysteries that even the creator admits may never be fully solved, we'll explore every shadow, every theory, and every disturbing implication hidden within this game's code and cutscenes. Whether you're here to finally understand what really happened in 1983, to uncover the truth behind those nightmare animatronics, or simply to let these dark revelations wash over you as you drift towards sleep, this journey will take us through the complete story of Five Nights at Freddy's 4. We'll examine the evidence piece by piece, connecting dots between sister locations' underground facility and that simple bedroom with its 2 doors and closet. We'll discover why Michael Afton, not the crying child, might be the one experiencing these terrors. We'll discuss William Afton's twisted experiments and what they reveal about the depths of his obsession. And we'll confront that locked box, the mystery Scott Cawthon himself has said he may never open, our understanding why some secrets are designed to remain forever out of reach. Before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of deep, immersive exploration of gaming lore. Let me know in the comments what aspects of FNAF 4 still keep you up at night, or which theories you find most compelling. There's something uniquely unsettling about this game that sets it apart from its predecessors, and together we'll uncover exactly why it continues to disturb players nearly a decade after its release. Let's begin. The first thing you notice when Five Nights at Freddy's 4 begins is how different it feels from everything that came before. Gone are the security cameras, the doors with lights, the office setting that defined the franchise. Instead, you find yourself in a child's bedroom, small and vulnerable, and surrounded by the familiar trappings of youth but twisted into instruments of terror. This single location, this bedroom with its hallways and closet and the bed behind you, becomes the entire world of your nightmare. It's intimate in a way the previous games never were. When you're sitting in a security office, there's a professional distance, a sense that you're an employee doing a job. But here, you're in someone's personal space, their sanctuary, the one place where they should feel safe. And that sanctuary has been violated. The bedroom layout itself tells a story. You stand in the center, able to turn left toward the left hallway, right toward the right hallway, or backward toward the closet and the bed. Each direction presents its own threat, its own way to die, if you're not careful. The left hallway is where Nightmare Bonnie approaches, his heavy footsteps echoing through the darkness. The right hallway belongs to Nightmare Chica, whose kitchen sounds sometimes betray her presence before you hear her breathing. The closet holds Nightmare Foxy, who accumulates there throughout the night if you're not vigilant about checking him. And the bed, the bed behind you spawns Freddles, tiny nightmare versions of Freddy that must be swept away with your flashlight before Nightmare Freddy himself manifests to end your night in bloody terror. The mechanics force you into a constant state of hypervigilance. You must listen carefully at each doorway before deciding whether to flash your light or shut the door. If you hear breathing, you must hold the door closed until the animatronic leaves. If you hear nothing, you can flash your light down the hallway to send them retreating, at least temporarily. Get it wrong, and you die. Check the closet too often, and Foxy becomes aggressive. Check it too rarely, and he accumulates until he rushes out in his iconic sprint. Monitor the bed too infrequently, and the Freddles multiply. Focus too much on the bed, and you neglect the doors. Every action has a consequence, every choice a potential mistake. But it's the atmosphere that truly sets this location apart. The bedroom exists in a strange state between reality and nightmare. The walls are decorated with childish drawings and toys. There's a toy telephone, a toy phone, plushies of the animatronics scattered about. During the day sections in the minigames, we see this same house in its normal state. A regular family home with a living room, kitchen, bedrooms. Yet at night, something changes. The house feels wrong, off somehow. There are no windows showing the outside world, no sense of being connected to a larger environment. It's as if the bedroom has been isolated, cut off, turned into a testing chamber, which, as we'll discover later, might not be far from the truth. The sound design amplifies this sense of wrongness. You can hear a grandfather clock ticking in the distance, marking the passage of time with mechanical precision. There are ambient sounds, creaks and groans that might be the house settling, or might be something moving through it. The breathing of the animatronics, when they're at your door, is uncomfortably human. A rasping inhalation that sends chills down your spine precisely because it shouldn't sound so alive. And then there's the silence, the terrible quiet when you're waiting, listening, trying to determine if it's safe to check the next location. That silence is almost worse than the sounds because it's pregnant with potential horror, with the knowledge that at any moment something could shatter that peace with a nightmare's roar. What makes this setting so psychologically effective is how it inverts our expectations of safety. Bedrooms are supposed to be refuges, the one place where we can be completely ourselves, where we can be vulnerable without fear. Children especially need their bedrooms to be safe spaces, places where imagination transforms into adventure rather than terror. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 corrupts this fundamental need, turning the bedroom into a trap, a place where safety is an illusion and the monsters under the bed are horrifyingly real. It's a violation of innocence on a conceptual level, taking the natural childhood fear of darkness and nightmares and validating it in the cruelest possible way. The game also plays with scale in unsettling ways. As a child, you're smaller than normal, making the animatronics seem even more massive and threatening. The doorways loom large. The closet becomes a cavern of darkness. The bed feels impossibly far away when you need to turn and check it. This shift in perspective reminds us that we're experiencing the world through a child's eyes, where everything is bigger and more overwhelming, where threats seem insurmountable and escape feels impossible. It's a clever design choice that makes the horror more immediate and personal. Yet there's also a strange sense of familiarity to this space, and many players have noted that the bedroom feels like somewhere they've been, some universal childhood room that exists in memory, even if the specific details differ. The placement of furniture, the way the shadows fall, the feeling of being small and alone in the dark, these are experiences most of us can relate to on some level. That relatability makes the horror more effective because it's not happening in some distant pizzeria or security office. It's happening in a space we recognize, a space that feels like it could be our own childhood bedroom, twisted into nightmare logic. The question that haunts this setting, the question that will become central to our understanding of the game's deeper mysteries, is whether this bedroom is even real. Is this truly a child's room in a normal house? Or is it something else? Is it a recreation, a simulation, a testing chamber designed to look like a bedroom while serving a far more sinister purpose? The evidence we'll examine later suggests that this space might be part of an experiment, that the house itself is connected to the underground facility we see in sister location, that everything about this seemingly innocent bedroom is a carefully constructed facade hiding something much darker. But for now, as we stand in the center of that room, flashlight in hand, listening to the approach of mechanical nightmares, all we know is that we're trapped here, forced to survive until the clock strikes 6 and morning finally comes. This is where the terror begins, in a child's bedroom turned battleground, where the familiar becomes foreign and safety becomes the greatest illusion of all. This is Five Nights at Freddy's 4, and this bedroom, with its deceptive simplicity and crushing psychological weight, sets the stage for the darkest story the franchise has ever told. At the heart of Five Nights at Freddy's 4 lies a child, small and frightened, whom the community has come to call the Crying Child. His actual name was never revealed in the game itself, though one popular theory suggests he might be named Evan, derived from clues some theorists found in the survival logbook. Whether this is accurate remains unconfirmed by Scott Cawthon, but what we can say with certainty is that this boy appears to be part of the Afton family, the dynasty that casts its shadow across the entire franchise. This boy, whether Evan or simply known as the Crying Child, is not like other children we encounter in Five Nights at Freddy's. He's not curious about the animatronics. He doesn't see them as sources of entertainment or wonder. Instead, he's terrified of them with a fear so profound, it defines his entire existence during the week we witness in the minigames. The minigames between nights paint a picture of a child trapped in a nightmare even during his waking hours. Each day, we control him as he navigates his world, a world that seems designed to torment him. The game opens with him locked in a room, pounding on the door, crying for a release, while someone, presumably his older brother, stands outside and laughs. This immediate introduction tells us everything we need to know about his daily life. He's powerless, trapped, at the mercy of those who should protect him, but instead find amusement in his suffering. When the door finally opens and his brother walks away, we're not greeted with relief, but with the discovery that the entire house is a prison, filled with reminders of the things he fears most. His terror of the animatronics isn't abstract or childish fancy. It's visceral and specific, rooted in experiences we witness throughout the minigames. We see him at Fredbear's family diner, surrounded by the very things that haunt his dreams. The animatronics loom large in his vision, their spring-lock suits hinting at the mechanical danger hidden beneath their friendly exteriors. At one point, we witness a scene that many theorists believe shaped his trauma. A glimpse backstage where a purple figure, typically interpreted throughout the series as representing William Afton, appears to be helping someone into a spring-lock suit. To a child, especially one already primed to fear these machines, such a sight would be nightmarish, suggesting that people can be put inside these creatures, trapped within their mechanical bodies. The Crying Child's family situation adds layers to his trauma. He has an older brother who torments him relentlessly, wearing a foxy mask and jumping out to scare him at every opportunity. This brother, who evidence strongly suggests is Michael Afton, based on later revelations in Sister Location and the survival logbook, has a group of friends who join in the bullying, wearing masks of Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica. They corner the crying child, mock him, threaten to feed him to the animatronics, turning his fear into a game for their amusement. There's a casual cruelty to their actions, the thoughtless brutality that children can inflict when they haven't yet developed empathy or understanding of consequences. But there's also something more deliberate, a targeting of a specific phobia that suggests they know exactly how to maximize his suffering. Then there's the girl, presumably his sister Elizabeth, based on Sister Location's revelations about the Afton family, though she's glimpsed only briefly in her bedroom, which sits empty and waiting. The family structure that emerges through environmental details and later games suggests this household belongs to William Afton, with Michael as the older brother, Elizabeth as the sister, who will meet her tragic end in Circus Baby's embrace, and this youngest child caught in the middle of what appears to be a family designed to produce tragedy. The Fredbear plush becomes the crying child's only source of comfort in this hostile world. Throughout the minigames, the plush appears in various locations, and always watching, always speaking words that seem meant to soothe but also warn. Tomorrow is another day, it tells him. Be careful, it cautions. The plush's words are cryptic, suggesting knowledge of events that haven't yet occurred, hinting at dangers the child cannot fully comprehend. Most disturbingly, the plush seems to follow him, appearing in places a normal toy shouldn't be able to reach, suggesting either supernatural elements or, as later evidence indicates, surveillance. The plush isn't just a toy. It's watching him, monitoring his movements, speaking to him with words that might be coming from someone else entirely. The crying child's fear has isolated him completely. He has no friends visible in the minigames, only tormentors. He can't turn to his family because his brother is his primary antagonist, and his father, as we'll discuss later, may have far more sinister reasons for monitoring his son's terror. Even the adults he encounters offer no help. The employees at Fredbear's don't protect him from his brother's cruelty. The other children at the diner participate in his torment or simply ignore him. He's alone with his fear, trapped in it, drowning in it, with no lifeline except a plush toy that speaks with a voice that isn't really its own. What's particularly tragic about the crying child is that his fear is entirely justified. He's not overreacting or being irrational. The animatronics are dangerous. The spring-lock suits do fail catastrophically, crushing the people inside them. The things he fears will eventually come true in ways even more horrible than he imagined. His terror is a kind of terrible foresight, an understanding that something is fundamentally wrong with these machines and the places they inhabit, even if he can't articulate why. He's the canary in the coal mine, sensing danger that others dismiss as childish fancy, right up until the moment that danger becomes undeniable reality. The minigames also show us his daily routine, the path he walks from Fredbear's to his home, passing various locations and characters. There's the girl with pigtails who tells him the animatronics come to life at night and hide the bodies of anyone they kill. A bit of schoolyard mythology that hits far too close to the franchise's actual lore. There's another boy who won't let him into a room, claiming his friend got locked in there and now it's his turn. A strange bit of dialogue that hints at something darker happening behind the scenes. That these encounters paint a picture of a community where children whisper about dangers that adults refuse to acknowledge, where the truth hides in plain sight, dressed as make-believe. As the week progresses toward his birthday, the crying child's fear intensifies. He knows something terrible is coming. The Fredbear plush's warnings become more urgent. The minigames take on a darker tone, shadows lengthening, the world closing in. He doesn't want to go to Fredbear's for his party. He begs to stay home, but his wishes don't matter to the people around him. The party is planned, the guests are invited. The stage is set for the tragedy that will define not just his life, but the entire timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's. The crying child represents something profoundly sad within the franchise's lore, and he's an innocent destroyed by circumstances beyond his control. A child whose legitimate fears were dismissed, whose trauma was used for entertainment by those who should have protected him, whose voice went unheard until it was silenced forever. Understanding him and his terror is essential to understanding why Five Nights at Freddy's 4 hits differently than other games in the series. This isn't about a security guard facing monster robots. This is about a child, small and powerless, trapped in a nightmare from which there's no waking, no escape, no salvation. This is about the moment when childhood ends not gradually, but violently, crushed between mechanical jaws that should never have closed. The tragedy that defines Five Nights at Freddy's 4, and the event that shapes everything else in the game and ripples throughout the franchise's entire timeline, is known as the Bite of 83. To understand why this moment matters so profoundly, we need to walk through it step by step, examining not just what happened, but how it happened and why it became the catalyst for so much of the horror that follows. This isn't just a random accident or a simple malfunction. It's the culmination of bullying, family dysfunction, and the inherent danger of technology that was never quite safe enough to begin with. The week leading up to the birthday party shows us a child spiraling deeper into fear with each passing day. The minigames aren't just breaks between nights. They're a countdown, each one bringing us closer to the moment when everything changes. On the first day, we see the crying child locked in his room, helpless. On subsequent days, we see him at Fredbear's, forced to confront his fears, while his brother and his friends mock him relentlessly. There's a scene where they threaten to take him to see Fredbear up close, to make him give the bear a big kiss. The crying child tries to run, but they catch him, lift him up, laughing at his tears. It's not presented as particularly malicious, not by the bullies anyway. To them, it's just a joke, just kids being kids. But to the crying child, it's a preview of the nightmare to come. The minigame before Night 5 is different from the others. The crying child wakes up alone in his room. No brother waiting to torment him. No voices from outside. He walks through the house, but it's empty. Everyone is already at Fredbear's family diner, where his birthday party is set to begin. The journey there feels ominous, the familiar path now weighted with dread. When he arrives, the party is in full swing. Children wearing masks of the animatronics dance and play. Balloons float through the air. Everything looks festive, celebratory, exactly what a child's birthday party should be. Except the birthday boy himself is terrified, backing away, trying to find somewhere safe to hide. That's when Michael and his friends make their move. Wearing their masks, Foxy for Michael, Freddy and Bonnie and Chica for the others, they surround the crying child. They're laughing, thinking this is the ultimate prank, the perfect way to help their friend's little brother overcome his fear by forcing him to face it. The psychology behind it is tragically misguided, and exposure therapy requires careful management, professional guidance, a safe environment where the person can gradually confront their fears. This is the exact opposite, a sudden, violent confrontation designed not to help, but to humiliate, to get a laugh at someone else's expense. They pick up the crying child, lifting him high despite his struggles and tears. He's crying, begging them to stop, but they don't listen or don't care. They carry him toward the stage where Fredbear performs, the golden bear that features so prominently in his nightmares, the mascot of the diner that bears his name. The animatronic is active, its jaw moving in its programmed routine, the spring lock mechanisms inside allowing it to function autonomously. This is crucial to understanding what happens next. Fredbear isn't just a costume or a static prop, and it's a working animatronic with internal components that include those notoriously dangerous spring locks, mechanisms that keep the animatronic parts compressed, so a human can wear the suit but can fail catastrophically if disturbed. The bullies lift the crying child higher, positioning his head near Fredbear's mouth. "Let's give him a big kiss," they chant, thinking it's hilarious, thinking once his head is in the bear's mouth and nothing happens, he'll see how silly his fear was. They push him forward. His head enters Fredbear's mouth, and then, in a moment that stretches into eternity, something goes wrong. The spring locks trigger. Maybe it's the moisture from the crying child's tears. Maybe it's the motion of his struggling. Maybe it's simply that the mechanisms were already damaged, already ready to fail, and this was just the final straw. Whatever the cause, the result is immediate and catastrophic. The spring locks release. The compressed animatronic components, held back under tension, snap forward with tremendous force. The crying child's skull is crushed between Fredbear's jaws. The screen goes black. When it returns, we see blood. We hear the sound that will haunt Five Nights at Freddy's forever, the mechanical crunch of metal meeting bone, and we see the crying child's body going limp. The bullies scatter. The party erupts into chaos. The moment that was supposed to be celebration becomes the scene of unimaginable trauma. The next minigame shows us the aftermath. The crying child is in a hospital bed, surrounded by medical equipment, the steady beep of monitors the only sound. His body is broken, his skull fractured, his brain injured beyond any hope of recovery. The plushies from his room have been brought to surround him, a small gesture of comfort that means nothing in the face of such injury. Michael appears, his voice breaking as he apologizes. "I'm sorry," he says, the words inadequate, too late, unable to undo what's been done. The guilt he feels in this moment will shape the rest of his existence, driving him through every subsequent game in ways we'll explore later. The Fredbear plush speaks one final time, its words cryptic and disturbing. "You're broken," it says, acknowledging the obvious. "I will put you back together." This phrase has spawned countless theories about what it means, whether it's a promise of resurrection, a hint at possession, or something else entirely. The text color changes for this final message, turning from yellow to a faded gray, suggesting that whoever is speaking now might not be the same entity that spoke through the plush before. Some theorists believe this is William Afton speaking, making a vow to restore his son through mechanical means or remnant experiments. Others think it's a supernatural presence, something beyond human understanding offering a form of continuation beyond death. Then the heart monitor flatlines. The steady beep becomes a continuous tone. The crying child's eyes close. The screen fades to black, and when it returns, we see something that confirms what we already knew. The minigame menu screen with a copyright date of 1983, establishing once and for all when this tragedy occurred. This wasn't the bite of 87 that Phone Guy mentions in the first game, and that incident where someone survived without their frontal lobe. This was earlier, separate, the bite of 83, and unlike that later incident, this victim didn't survive. The crying child died on his birthday, killed by the very fear his brother and friends tried to force him to overcome. The implications of this event ripple outward through the entire franchise. For Michael, it's the defining moment of his life, the sin he'll spend decades trying to atone for. For William Afton, assuming the crying child was indeed his son, it's potentially the catalyst that drives him deeper into his experiments with death and resurrection. For the diner and the larger Fazbear Entertainment organization, it's a disaster that forces changes in policy, the decommissioning of springlock suits, increased safety measures that ultimately prove insufficient. And for the crying child himself, whether his spirit lingers in Golden Freddy as some theorists believe, or simply passes on, it's the end of a short life defined by fear that proved prophetically justified. The Bite of 83 is horrible, not because it's particularly gory or graphic. The game is relatively restrained in its depiction, but because it's so tragically preventable. If the bullies had shown any empathy, if the adults had been supervising properly, if the springlock technology hadn't been so inherently dangerous, if the crying child's fears had been taken seriously instead of mocked, none of this needed to happen. It's a cascade of failures, each small in itself, that combines into catastrophe. That's what makes it so disturbing. We can see how easily it could have been avoided, and we can see how the same dynamics that led to it, the dismissal of children's concerns, the prioritization of entertainment over safety, the arrogance of adults who think they know better, continue throughout the franchise's timeline, leading to more deaths, more tragedies, more families destroyed. This is the Bite of 83, the foundational tragedy of Five Nights at Freddy's 4. The moment when a child's worst nightmare came true in ways even more horrible than he imagined, crushing not just his body, but the innocence of everyone who witnessed it, leaving scars that will never fully heal. When you encounter the animatronics in Five Nights at Freddy's 4, your first reaction is probably visceral terror, followed closely by questions. What are these things? Why do they look like this? The nightmare animatronics are unlike anything we've seen in previous games, taking the familiar characters of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, and transforming them into something that barely resembles the child-friendly entertainers they're supposed to be. These aren't just weathered or damaged animatronics, like the withered versions from Five Nights at Freddy's 2. These are deliberate perversions of those designs, exaggerations that seem purpose-built to terrify, rather than entertain. Let's start with Nightmare Freddy, because he sets the template for what makes these designs so effective at inducing dread. His body is torn and tattered, the brown fur ripped away in places to reveal the grey endoskeleton beneath. His teeth, oh his teeth, they're everywhere. His mouth is filled with them, a row upon row of sharp metal teeth that look designed to rend and tear. But it doesn't stop at his mouth. His chest cavity opens to reveal more teeth, creating a second mouth in his torso, a detail that makes no mechanical sense whatsoever, but psychological sense perfectly. It's a visual representation of insatiable hunger, the idea that this thing doesn't just want to bite you, it wants to consume you entirely. His claws are exaggerated, long and sharp, each finger tipped with what looks like a metal blade rather than the stubby digits of a normal animatronic. And his eyes, when he's active, glow with an eerie light, sometimes yellow, sometimes red, always conveying malevolence and awareness. But Nightmare Freddy isn't alone. He's accompanied by the Freddles, three miniature versions of himself that appear on the bed throughout the night. The Freddles are genius from a design perspective because they represent multiplication of threat. It's not just that Freddy is coming, It's that pieces of Freddy are already here, accumulating, gathering strength. When there are enough Freddles on the bed, Nightmare Freddy manifests fully, emerging from the bed itself to kill you. The imagery is powerful, the monster forming from its component parts, like fear itself coalescing from multiple smaller anxieties into one overwhelming terror. For a child afraid of what's under or behind the bed, the Freddles are that fear made literal. Nightmare Bonnie maintains the rabbit form, but loses all cuteness in the translation. He's skeletal, his purple fur hanging in strips from his frame like rotting flesh, and his face is the worst part, elongated and nightmarish, with a mouth that seems to take up half his head. Like Freddy, he has multiple rows of teeth, but Bonnie's seem somehow more organic, more like they're growing from some diseased gum tissue, rather than simply mechanical components. His eyes are small, beady, and intense, and when he's at your door, when you hear his breathing, you know that opening that door will be fatal. His approach from the left hallway is methodical, patient, the tread of something that knows it has all night, and you only have until 6. His design emphasizes length. Everything about him is elongated, his limbs, his face, his ears, making him seem to stretch impossibly, to reach farther than he should be able to. Nightmare Chica brings elements of decay and corruption to her design, and the yellow of her body has a sickly quality. And like the others, she's torn and ravaged, her endoskeleton visible through gaps in her covering. Her jaw is particularly disturbing, hanging lower than it should, giving her a perpetually open-mouthed expression of hunger. The nightmare cupcake that accompanies her is arguably more terrifying than the cupcakes in other games because of its teeth. This tiny dessert has been transformed into something that could bite your fingers off, a perversion of something that should be sweet and harmless. Chica's behavior adds to her menace. She sometimes makes noises from the kitchen, suggesting she's searching, hunting, trying to find you through sound and scent like a predator tracking prey. And Nightmare Foxy deserves special attention because his design plays with the character's pirate theme in disturbing ways. His hook is enormous, gleaming and sharp, a weapon that draws the eye and promises violence. His face has been damaged, the covering torn away to reveal the skull-like endoskeleton head beneath, giving him a death's head appearance. Unlike the others who approach from the hallways, Foxy accumulates in the closet, forcing you to check on him regularly, but not too often. His design in the closet is unique because we see him in stages. First as a plush, then as plush trap, then emerging partially, and finally fully formed and ready to sprint at you. That sprint, when it comes, is one of the most viscerally terrifying animations in the game because it's so fast, so aggressive, so unavoidable if you've let him accumulate too much. The pirate imagery that should evoke adventure stories becomes instead a promise of violence. The hooks and teeth and skull face, all signaling danger rather than fun. Then we have Nightmare Fredbear, who appears on night 5 and represents an escalation in horror. He's similar to Nightmare Freddy, but golden instead of brown, a twisted version of the animatronic that killed the crying child. His appearance is significant because Fredbear is the source of the child's trauma, the thing that literally crushed him. So seeing this nightmare version confirms that these designs are rooted in specific fears and experiences. Nightmare Fredbear's stomach mouth is particularly prominent, the teeth-filled cavity in his torso yawning wide. And when he kills you, the screen is filled with this image of being devoured, consumed, ending not in peace but in the belly of the beast. Finally, There's Nightmare, the shadow animatronic who appears on later nights and represents the ultimate expression of these design principles. Nightmare is Nightmare Fredbear's color scheme inverted, a translucent black figure with yellow accents, more ghost than animatronic. When illuminated by the flashlight, you can see through him, see the brain and organs inside, rendered in disturbing detail. Nightmare represents fear itself, unbound by physical form, able to approach from anywhere, any direction. His laugh is one of the most chilling sounds in the game, echoing through the house as he stalks you. A nightmare is what happens when you strip away even the pretense of these being animatronics and reveal them for what they really are in this context, manifestations of pure terror given physical form. The question these designs raise is obvious. Why do they look like this? In universe, these animatronics make no practical sense. No entertainment company would build something this obviously terrifying for children. Their teeth alone would be a lawsuit waiting to happen. The exposed endoskeletons, the claws, the grotesque proportions, none of it serves any function for entertainment purposes. So what are they really? The most straightforward interpretation is that they're nightmares, literal bad dreams experienced by someone traumatized by animatronics. The exaggerated features, the impossible proportions, and the combination of mechanical and organic elements, all of this fits how nightmares work, taking something from reality and distorting it, amplifying the threatening aspects while stripping away anything comforting. But there's another interpretation suggested by connections to sister location, and it's far more disturbing. What if these designs aren't random nightmare logic? What if they're deliberate, created specifically to terrorize? Later evidence suggests the house might be part of an experimental facility, that the nightmare animatronics might be actual physical objects, whether real animatronics, costumes, or something else, used to induce fear in test subjects. In this reading, their design becomes even more sinister because it means someone, most likely William Afton, designed them specifically to maximize psychological trauma. And every tooth, every claw, every grotesque detail would be a calculated choice made to push fear responses to their absolute limits. The teeth, in particular, seem significant beyond simple monster design. Teeth represent consumption, destruction, the ultimate fear of being devoured or destroyed. Multiple sets of teeth, teeth in impossible places like torsos, teeth that fill every visible space in a mouth. This is fear of annihilation made visual. For the crying child, who was literally killed by mechanical jaws, teeth would have special psychological resonance. For someone running experiments to understand fear responses, teeth would be an obvious element to emphasize. The endoskeleton elements visible through the torn exteriors also serve a purpose beyond aesthetics. They remind us that these are machines, and that beneath any friendly appearance is cold metal and mechanical components. It's a stripping away of the illusion that the animatronics are safe or friendly, revealing the dangerous reality that was always underneath. The crying child saw this reality, saw behind the curtain, understood that these were dangerous machines pretending to be friends. The nightmare animatronics simply make that truth visible, impossible to ignore or deny. The design philosophy of the nightmare animatronics is ultimately about making fear physical and inescapable. They're too big to fight, too strong to overpower, too relentless to outlast. Your only option is to hide, to listen, to hope you can survive until morning. They represent helplessness in the face of overwhelming threat, which is particularly resonant if we're experiencing these nightmares as Michael Afton, someone who learned as a child that actions have terrible consequences, that cruelty leads to tragedy, that there are things you can't take back or fix. These designs are the physical manifestation of guilt and trauma, the horror of knowing you caused someone's death, twisted into mechanical form and given the power to kill you in turn. They're nightmares in every sense, both literal dream monsters and metaphorical representations of psychological torment that refuses to end. Understanding their design is crucial to understanding the deeper themes of Five Nights at Freddy's 4, because these animatronics aren't just obstacles to overcome in a video game. They're symbols of trauma, guilt, fear, and the way past horrors continue to haunt us long after the original events have ended. They're too horrible to be real, yet too detailed to be dismissible. They're the perfect encapsulation of a game that exists in the space between nightmare and reality, where the line between them has been deliberately blurred until we can no longer tell which side we're on. The deeper you dig into Five Nights at Freddy's 4, the more unsettling implications you uncover. And nowhere is this more apparent than in the connections to sister location that suggest something truly disturbing about the nature of the nightmares themselves. What if the bedroom, the house, the entire experience isn't simply a dream? What if it's part of something far more sinister? A controlled environment designed by William Afton to study fear, to understand trauma, to push the limits of human psychological endurance? The evidence for this interpretation is subtle but substantial, woven through multiple games and culminating in revelations that recontextualize everything we thought we understood about Five Nights at Freddy's 4. Let's start with the most direct evidence, the private room in sister location. When you complete the main game and access this secret area, you find something unexpected. There's a desk with monitors, and sitting on that desk is a Fredbear plush, the same type of plush that accompanies the crying child throughout FNAF 4's minigames. In the plush's hand is what appears to be a walkie-talkie or remote control, immediately suggesting that the plush wasn't simply a toy, but a tool for communication and surveillance. If you enter the code 1983 into the keypad in this room, the monitors activate, showing security camera feeds. And those feeds display locations we recognize: the bedroom from FNAF 4, the hallways, the areas we defended during the night sections. These aren't just random Easter eggs. They're confirmations that the FNAF 4 locations are under surveillance, that someone is watching, monitoring, recording everything that happens there. The implications are staggering. If the private room contains a monitoring station for the FNAF 4 house, and if the private room is located within Circus Baby's entertainment and rental facility, then the house must be somehow connected to that underground complex. This connection is further confirmed by the breaker room map, another sister location element that shows a schematic of the facility. If you look carefully at this map, you can identify areas that correspond to FNAF 4 locations. There's the bedroom layout, the plush trap hallway, even what appears to be the minigame house configuration. The map labels some areas as observation, strongly suggesting their purpose. These aren't normal living spaces. They're observation chambers, experimental environments designed to look like normal rooms, while serving as stages for controlled psychological testing. This reframing transforms our entire understanding of FNAF 4. The bedroom we defended isn't a child's actual room in a suburban home. It's a recreation, a set piece built in an underground facility. The nightmare animatronics aren't just manifestations of fear in someone's sleeping mind. They might be physical objects, costumes worn by people, or actual animatronics used to terrorize test subjects in controlled conditions. The entire experience becomes not a dream, but an experiment, a study of fear conducted by William Afton for purposes that remain chillingly unclear. But how would such an experiment work? How do you make someone experience these nightmares? Here's where things get even darker. In the tales from the Pizzaplex story Dittophobia, which exists in the book line that often parallels game events without being directly canon, we're given a potential framework for understanding how such experiments might function. The story follows a character who discovers he's been kept in an underground facility for years, subjected to fear experiments through the use of hallucinogenic gas. The gas distorts his perception, making him see ordinary objects as terrifying animatronic threats. His sense of time becomes unreliable. His memories become confused with manufactured experiences. While this story exists in the book line rather than game canon, the parallels to FNAF 4 are striking enough that many theorists view it as Scott Cawthon's way of explaining the mechanics behind the game's events without contradicting what's shown directly. Imagine the scenario. Test subjects, possibly children who've experienced trauma related to Fazbear Entertainment, are placed in these observation chambers. The rooms are designed to look like normal bedrooms to provide familiarity and initially lower anxiety. Then, at night, the experiments begin. Hallucinogenic gas is pumped into the room, altering perception, making the subject see things that aren't really there or perceive ordinary objects as threatening. And maybe there are animatronic parts, endoskeletons, or people in costumes that the gas makes them perceive as the nightmare creatures. The subjects are told they must survive until 6 a.m., creating a time pressure that amplifies the fear response. Their reactions are monitored, recorded, studied. The goal might be to understand how fear works, how trauma affects perception, how the human mind responds to sustained terror. From a scientific perspective, if you wanted to study fear, this setup would provide controlled conditions and repeatable results. You could vary the stimuli, the gas dosage, the duration of exposure. You could observe how different subjects react to the same situation. You could collect data on physiological responses, heart rate, breathing patterns, stress hormones. It's profoundly unethical and violating every principle of human research ethics. But it would provide data. And if William Afton's character is anything, it's someone willing to cross ethical boundaries in pursuit of his goals, whatever those goals might be. This interpretation also explains several oddities about FNAF 4's gameplay. Why does the house feel enclosed, cut off from the outside world? Because it's underground, part of a facility with no real windows or connections to a normal neighborhood. Why do the animatronics behave the way they do, following specific patterns, appearing in specific locations? Because they're being controlled, following protocols designed by the experiment's architect. Why does the clock advance in such regimented fashion, with each hour marked so clearly? Because the experiment runs on a schedule, and with 6 a.m. being when the test ends and the subject is removed or the gas is cleared from the room. Why do we wake up unharmed each morning, despite dying horrifically during the night? Because the deaths might not be real, might be perceived failures that trigger the next phase of the experiment, possibly through the gas causing unconsciousness or the subject being removed and told to try again. The role of the Fredbear plush becomes even more disturbing in this context. If it contains a walkie-talkie or speaker, someone could be talking through it, guiding the test subject, offering false comfort, or providing instructions. Tomorrow is another day takes on a sinister meaning, if it's not a comforting thought, but a statement that the experiment will continue, that there's no escape from the cycle of terror. I will put you back together could be a promise related to the experiment's goals, perhaps suggesting William's belief that sustained fear could somehow affect consciousness or souls in ways he wants to study. Who are the test subjects? This is where theories diverge significantly. Some believe it's the crying child himself, that before his death, he was subjected to these experiments, perhaps explaining the nightmares in his final days, or even suggesting the minigames showing his normal life are the real false memories and the nightmares are the truth. But this runs into chronological problems. The minigames clearly lead up to his death at the party. There's not room in that timeline for extended experimentation. Others suggest Michael Afton is the subject, that after killing his brother, had his father subjected him to these experiments as punishment, forcing him to experience terror night after night as penance for what he did. This fits better with the survival logbook evidence showing Michael drew Nightmare Fredbear, confirming he experienced these nightmares. A third possibility, suggested by the ditophobia parallels, is that William Afton ran these experiments on multiple children over extended periods, testing various theories about fear, memory, perception, and possibly the supernatural elements he was researching. The FNAF 4 protagonist might be just one of many test subjects, possibly a child who witnessed something Afton wanted to keep secret, or a child with specific trauma that made them ideal for studying fear responses. The observation chambers would allow him to conduct these experiments while running the rental facility above. The two operations existing in parallel, one public and one horrifically private. The purpose of these experiments, if they exist, as the sister location connections suggest, remains a subject of debate in the community. One theory proposes William was trying to understand the fear and agony that seemed to fuel supernatural phenomena in the FNAF universe, studying them scientifically to harness or replicate them. Another suggests he was trying to recreate the conditions that led to his son's death, attempting to understand what happened psychologically in those moments, perhaps as part of his quest to put him back together. A third and darker interpretation suggests the experiments might serve no higher purpose beyond satisfying a desire to inflict suffering and study its effects, with any scientific veneer being a justification for cruelty. What makes this experimentation angle so deeply disturbing is how it reframes the game's horror. Nightmares are terrible, but they're temporary, products of our own minds that end when we wake. But systematic, deliberate experimentation designed to induce terror, conducted on children by an adult who should be protecting them. This is a violation on a completely different scale. It's the horror of betrayed trust, of authority abused, of safety revealed as illusion. The bedroom that should be a refuge becomes a laboratory. The parent who should protect becomes the source of trauma. The animatronics that should entertain become instruments of torture. If this interpretation is correct, and the evidence from sister locations certainly suggests it should be seriously considered, then Five Nights at Freddy's 4 isn't just about surviving nightmares. It's about being trapped in a system designed to break you, to study your breaking, to extract data from your suffering. It's about the ultimate loss of control, being reduced to a test subject in someone else's experiment, your fear no longer your own, but something manufactured, controlled, weaponized. That's why FNAF 4 feels different, why it's darker than the other games. Because beneath the nightmare animatronics and the jump scares lies a possibility almost too horrible to confront, that someone created this suffering deliberately, scientifically, and recorded every moment of it for analysis. The experimental truth, if that's what it is, doesn't negate the possibility of supernatural elements. FNAF has always blended science and the supernatural possession and mechanics, ghosts and experiments. The nightmare animatronics could be hallucinations induced by gas, physical costumes worn to terrify subjects, and manifestations of genuine supernatural forces, all at the same time. William Afton's experiments might have been attempts to understand and harness the supernatural elements he discovered through his murders, using fear as a tool to study how souls interact with machines. The observation chambers might have been designed to capture not just behavioral data, but evidence of supernatural phenomena, attempting to record the moment when trauma transcends the purely physical and becomes something else. Whatever the full truth might be, the connections between FNAF 4 and Sister Location paint a picture of experiments conducted in darkness, of suffering measured and recorded, of childhood terror transformed into data points for an obsessed mind's research. It's a truth that makes the game's horror far more immediate and disturbing, because it suggests that somewhere beneath the ground, in rooms designed to look like home, terrible things were done to children in the name of understanding fear. And that understanding, once gained, was used for purposes we still don't fully comprehend, but which led to even greater horrors in the games that follow. This is the experimental truth. Five Nights at Freddy's 4's nightmares might have been real in the worst possible way, not as actual monsters, but as deliberately constructed psychological torture, carried out with scientific precision by a man willing to sacrifice anything and anyone in pursuit of his goals. One of the most significant revelations about Five Nights at Freddy's 4 came not from the game itself, but from the survival logbook, an official guidebook that doubles as a piece of interactive lore. This book, designed to look like a security log for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, contains notes and doodles from its previous owner, and through careful analysis of handwriting, artistic style and content, the community determined that owner was Michael Afton. Within this logbook's pages lies evidence that fundamentally changes how we understand FNAF 4's protagonist and, by extension, the entire experience of the nightmares we've been discussing. The most direct piece of evidence appears on page 41, where the logbook asks, "Do you have dreams?" In response to this question, Michael has drawn an extremely detailed picture of Nightmare Fredbear. Not a cartoon version or simplified sketch, but an accurate rendering of the nightmare animatronic as it appears in the game, complete with the distinctive features, the proportions, the teeth-filled torso. This drawing is remarkable for several reasons. First, it demonstrates that Michael has intimate knowledge of what Nightmare Fredbear looks like, not a general sense, but specific details that could only come from personal experience. Second, is presented explicitly as an answer to a question about dreams, confirming that Michael experienced these visions, whether as actual dreams or something else. Third, the level of detail suggests these experiences were memorable enough, traumatic enough, that years later Michael can still reproduce the image with precision. This single drawing effectively answers one of FNAF 4's most debated questions. Who is the protagonist of the night sections? Since the game's release, theorists have been split. Some argued we play as the crying child, that the nightmares are his final visions as he lies dying in the hospital, or perhaps his eternal torment as a spirit trapped in limbo. Others suggested the nightmares belong to someone else entirely, possibly a separate character. But the survival logbook provides strong evidence that we play as Michael Afton, the older brother, the bully, the one responsible for the crying child's death. And this revelation transforms our understanding of everything. Michael Afton, as we know him from Sister Location, is a man haunted by his past. The minigames in that game show him searching for something, driven by a need to find and free his sister Elizabeth, following his father's cryptic instructions. He willingly enters the underground facility, endures the trials there, allows himself to be scooped and used as a skin suit by Ennard, all in pursuit of some form of redemption. His monologue at the end of Sister Location confirms his identity as the older brother. "Father, it's me, Michael." The exotic butters were much appreciated. That last line is a joke, but the rest is sincere. He's letting his father know he completed the task, found what needed finding. And then he mentions that he's been living in shadows, looking for someone, his father presumably, driven by what happened. "They thought I was you." Michael's entire character arc is defined by guilt and the need to atone. He killed his little brother. Not intentionally, not with malice, but he did it nonetheless. The prank went wrong, the spring locks failed, the crying child died, and Michael has to live with knowing he caused that death. This guilt is comprehensive, consuming, the kind that reshapes a person's entire life. Every decision he makes afterward, going to Sister Location to free Elizabeth, searching for his father, potentially working as security guards at various Freddy's locations throughout the series. All of it flows from that moment when his cruelty had consequences he never imagined. The nightmares then become manifestations of this guilt. When Michael sleeps, or perhaps when he's subjected to his father's experiments, we'll return to this. His mind conjures the very things his brother feared. The animatronics that terrorized the crying child now terrorize Michael. The creatures that haunted a small child's dreams now stalk through Michael's consciousness, enlarged and distorted, transformed into the ultimate expressions of the fear Michael caused, and now must experience himself. There's a perfect psychological symmetry to it. Michael made his brother afraid of these characters, used his own foxy mask to terrorize him, and now the nightmare versions of these characters have become Michael's own personal tormentors. Nightmare Fredbear is particularly significant in this reading. He's not just any nightmare animatronic. He's specifically the one that killed the crying child, the golden bear whose jaws crushed a small skull. For Michael to experience nightmares dominated by this particular character makes perfect psychological sense. Fredbear is the physical manifestation of Michael's greatest mistake, the consequence of his action made into a monster that can kill him in turn. Every time Nightmare Fredbear appears, Michael is confronted with the memory of what happened, forced to face the moment when everything went wrong, unable to escape or forget. The teeth that Nightmare Fredbear displays so prominently are the teeth that killed his brother, and now they're coming for him. The setting of the nightmares, the bedroom and house, also makes more sense if we're playing as Michael. Throughout FNAF 4's minigames, we never see the older brother's room. We see the crying child's room, decorated with plushies and childish toys. We see what's presumably Elizabeth's room, though it's empty, waiting for furniture. But the older brother's room is never shown. It's possible that the bedroom where the nightmares take place is Michael's room, his actual childhood bedroom, making the nightmares a violation of his personal space in the same way he violated his brother's sense of safety. Or, if we accept the experimentation theory, the bedroom is a recreation of Michael's room, built by William as part of the punishment or study, forcing Michael to defend a space that should be safe against monsters that represent his sins. Some theorists suggest the nightmares began naturally and stemming from Michael's trauma and guilt after his brother's death, but were then exploited or amplified by William's experiments. Perhaps young Michael experienced genuine nightmares, and William, recognizing their potential, used them as a template for his fear experiments, recreating them artificially through gas and costumes and controlled conditions. This would explain why the nightmares feel both personal and constructed, both psychological and physical. They're rooted in real guilt and trauma, but have been weaponized, turned into an experiment that serves William's purposes, while simultaneously punishing Michael for his role in the family tragedy. The timing of when Michael experiences these nightmares is important, but remains unclear in the community. Do they occur shortly after the crying child's death, when the guilt is freshest? Do they happen years later, after Michael has become an adult, returning to haunt him during his work as a security guard? Are they ongoing, a permanent feature of his psychology that manifests whenever he sleeps? The survival logbook suggests the latter might be true, that even as an adult, even after everything he's been through in Sister Location and beyond, Michael still has these nightmares, still sees Nightmare Fredbear when he closes his eyes. The trauma doesn't fade with time. The guilt doesn't diminish. If anything, as Michael learns more about what his father has done, as he discovers the full scope of the tragedies connected to Fazbear Entertainment, his guilt might intensify, feeding the nightmares, making them stronger and more persistent. There's also evidence in FNAF 4 itself that points toward Michael as the protagonist, though it requires interpretation. The reversed and distorted phone guy call from FNAF 1 that can be heard in the background ambience suggests a connection to later events at a Freddy's location. Why would someone experiencing nightmares in or around 1983 have audio from a phone call that happens years later bleeding into those nightmares? But if Michael is the protagonist, if he's experiencing these nightmares during or after working as a security guard, possibly as Mike Schmidt from the first game, a connection many theorists draw based on the survival logbook evidence, then the inclusion of that audio makes more sense. It's a fragment from his work environment bleeding into his nightmares. The way real sounds sometimes influence our dreams and creating a hybrid of memory and fear. The behaviors of the nightmare animatronics also parallel the FNAF. One animatronics more than they do the characters as they exist in 1983. Nightmare Bonnie and Nightmare Chica, approaching from hallways, the importance of doors and lights. Nightmare Foxy hiding in a closet before rushing out. These mechanics mirror FNAF, one more than they reflect what animatronics actually did at Fredbear's family diner. This suggests the nightmares are formed not from the crying child's perspective of how animatronics behaved in 1983, but from Michael's later experiences with them, filtered through his earlier trauma. The nightmares are a fusion of past and present, childhood guilt and adult understanding, the innocent fear of a child, and the terrible knowledge of what those machines really are and what they've done. Michael's journey through the series, if we follow the popular theory that he's the protagonist of multiple games, becomes a quest for redemption that's inseparable from these nightmares. He potentially works at various Freddy's locations, not just for a paycheck, but searching for something, trying to understand what happened to the souls trapped in the machines, attempting to make amends in whatever way he can. He follows his father's instructions to find Elizabeth, enduring body horror and death itself in the process. He potentially returns to the burned remains of Fazbear's Fright, searching for his father. He might even be the protagonist of Pizzeria Simulator, gathering the haunted animatronics one final time so they can all be freed in fire. Every action is driven by the guilt instilled in one moment of childhood cruelty, our one prank that went too far, one death that can never be undone. The nightmares are the internal manifestation of this external quest. While Michael physically searches for redemption in the waking world, in sleep, he's forced to confront the same demons again and again. The nightmare animatronics are judge and jury, evaluating him each night, testing whether he's worthy of forgiveness. He can survive until 6 a.m., can make it through the night, but he never truly wins. The next night always comes. The nightmare animatronics always return. Because guilt doesn't end. Trauma doesn't simply resolve. The weight of having caused someone's death doesn't lift just because you want it to, or because you've suffered enough. Michael is trapped in a cycle as much as any of the spirits haunting the physical animatronics, his soul bound not to a machine, but to the memory of what he did. The brother he killed, the fear he caused that was justified all along. Understanding that Michael is the protagonist recontextualizes the game's title. Five Nights at Freddy's 4. It's not just the fourth game. It's suggesting these are Freddy's 5 nights. Freddy's claim on someone. Freddy's judgment. And if Nightmare Freddy represents the guilt and fear Michael feels, then yes, these are the nights when that guilt manifests, when Michael must face what he's done, when he must survive his own conscience made manifest as mechanical horror. The game becomes less about a child's nightmare and more about an adult's inescapable guilt, less about fictional monsters and more about the very real monster Michael fears he became. The bully whose cruelty killed an innocent child. And this is why Five Nights at Freddy's 4 feels so personal, so intimate compared to the other games. We're not just playing a security guard doing a job or a technician following instructions. We're experiencing Michael Afton's private hell, the nightmares born from the worst thing he ever did, the guilt that defines his entire existence. Every time we die to Nightmare Fredbear, every time those jaws close on us, we're experiencing what Michael imagines his brother felt in those final moments, the terror and pain and betrayal. And every time we survive until 6 a.m., it's not a victory, it's just a temporary reprieve, because Michael knows the nightmares will return, just as they've returned every night since that day at Fredbear's, when everything changed forever. Our understanding Michael as the protagonist transforms Five Nights at Freddy's 4 from a simple horror game into a meditation on guilt, trauma, and whether redemption is possible for those who've caused irreparable harm. It's a question Michael spends the entire series trying to answer, and it's a question the nightmares ask him every single night. Throughout the minigames of Five Nights at Freddy's 4, the crying child's constant companion is a Fredbear plush, a simple toy that becomes one of the game's central mysteries through its seemingly supernatural qualities. This plush appears everywhere the child goes, offering cryptic comfort and warnings that seem far beyond what an ordinary stuffed animal should be capable of. The question of what the Fredbear plush really represents, who might be speaking through it, and what its presence means for understanding the game's deeper mysteries has spawned extensive debate and multiple competing theories that reveal layers of complexity to the Afton family's story. The first thing to notice about the Fredbear plush is that it appears to move on its own. In the minigames, the child will see it in different locations, places where he didn't leave it, and where a normal plush shouldn't be able to reach. It appears on top of a grandfather clock, tucked into a sewer grate, sitting among flowers on the roadside, positioned on a table at Fredbear's family diner. This mobility suggests either supernatural properties, someone moving it deliberately to follow the child, or both simultaneously. The plush's eyes are also significant, sometimes appearing as normal toy eyes, at other times showing the distinctive black sclera with white pupils that Five Nights at Freddy's uses to indicate possession or supernatural activity. The words, "The plush speaks," add to the mystery. Tomorrow is another day, it tells the crying child, a phrase that could be comforting or ominous depending on interpretation. When the child is afraid, the plush reminds him to be careful, or you know what will happen if he catches you, suggesting awareness of specific threats. Most famously, in the final minigame after the crying child has been fatally injured, the plush's text color changes from yellow to grey as it says, "I will put you back together," a promise that has defined speculation about the franchise's direction for years. These aren't the kind of things a normal toy would say, even in a child's imagination. They display knowledge of events and consequences, suggesting either supernatural awareness or someone using the plush as a communication device. Sister Location provides what seems like an answer to the mystery. In the private room, we find a Fredbear plush sitting on the desk next to monitors displaying security camera feeds of the FNAF 4 locations. Crucially, this plush is holding what appears to be either a walkie-talkie or a remote control directly in front of the monitors. The implication is clear. The Fredbear plush contains technology that allows someone to communicate through it and to receive video feeds from its location. The plush isn't supernatural. It's a sophisticated surveillance and communication device disguised as a child's toy, a nanny cam with audio output capabilities. This revelation suggests that someone, most likely William Afton given that the private room is his personal space, was watching the crying child constantly and speaking to him through the plush, providing guidance, comfort, or manipulation as needed. This interpretation makes William Afton the voice speaking through the plush for at least some of the time, which carries disturbing implications. William would be watching his son constantly, monitoring his movements, his interactions, his fears. The question becomes, why? The most innocent explanation is that William is being protective, perhaps overprotective given the dangers inherent in his business. He knows spring-lock suits can fail catastrophically. He knows his animatronics have dangerous components. By keeping the crying child under surveillance and providing warnings through the plush, he might be trying to prevent his son from being hurt. The plush's warnings to be careful and its knowledge of dangers would support this reading, suggesting a father who cares but expresses that care through control and surveillance rather than direct interaction. A darker interpretation suggests William's monitoring could serve experimental purposes. If we accept the theory that William runs fear experiments in underground chambers, a possibility suggested by Sister Location's layout and the dittophobia parallels, perhaps he's studying his own son's fear responses, using the crying child as an initial test subject or case study. The plush would allow him to gather data on what frightens the child, how he responds to warnings, whether his fear can be managed or amplified through suggestions. The placement of the plush in strategic locations might be William testing whether his son will follow its guidance, conditioning him to respond to its voice, preparing him for more intensive experimentation. The "I will put you back together" promise could be William's vow to use his experiments to somehow restore his son, perhaps through technological means, remnant manipulation, or other methods he's researching. However, there's a significant problem with the simple walkie-talkie explanation that theorists have identified: timing and physical possibility. In some mini-games, we see the plush speaking to the crying child, while simultaneously seeing a purple figure, presumably William, in the same scene, but clearly not in a position to be speaking through the device. The most notable example is the backstage scene where Purple Guy is helping someone into a springlock suit. The plush speaks immediately after this scene, suggesting William couldn't have been the one talking through it at that moment unless he had the walkie-talkie with him and was multitasking in an unlikely way. This discrepancy has led to theories that while William might use the plush for surveillance and occasional communication, someone or something else also speaks through it at times. One alternative theory proposes the plush might be possessed, that a spirit uses it as a vessel to communicate with the crying child. The most popular candidate for this spirit among theorists is the puppet, or more specifically, Charlotte Emily's spirit that possesses it. The puppet's role throughout the franchise involves protecting children and giving gifts, attempting to save or comfort those trapped by Fazbear Entertainment's tragedies, which would align with the plush's protective language and warnings. Additionally, the text color change in the final scene, where "I will put you back together" appears in grey instead of yellow, could indicate a different speaker, possibly the puppet speaking through the plush, after William is no longer able to, or after the crying child's death, when supernatural intervention becomes possible. Another candidate that has gained traction since Sister Location's release is Elizabeth Afton, the sister who dies in Circus Baby. The private room in Sister Location also contains drawings that appear to be from a little girl, and the voice of Baby speaks to you throughout that game, sometimes seeming distinct from Elizabeth's personality possessing the animatronic. Some theorists propose that Elizabeth's spirit, after her death, could have possessed or influenced the Fredbear plush, using it to speak to her brother. This would explain the protective nature of the plush's words and the promise to put him back together, as it mirrors what Michael does for Elizabeth in Sister Location. The text "I'm still here" that the plush speaks appears elsewhere in contexts associated with Baby and Elizabeth, creating a potential connection. The technology versus supernatural debate becomes less binary when we consider that Five Nights at Freddy's consistently blends both elements. The plush could be technological in origin, built by William with cameras and speakers, while also becoming a vessel for supernatural forces. A spirit might use the existing technology as an anchor point, speaking through the communication system William installed, adding their own supernatural awareness to the mechanical surveillance. This hybrid explanation would account for the plush's presence in seemingly impossible locations, supernatural teleportation, its technological components, the walkie-talkie and cameras, and its dual nature of providing both practical warnings based on camera surveillance and supernatural knowledge, awareness of future events or spiritual truths. The promise, "I will put you back together," remains one of the most analyzed lines in the franchise. What does it mean? If William is speaking, it might be a vow to restore his son through his experiments with remnant and possessed animatronics, of attempting to bring him back to life or preserve his consciousness in some form. If the puppet is speaking, it might be promising to give the crying child's spirit peace through the happiest day ritual we see in FNAF 3, where the child's soul is finally allowed to rest. If Elizabeth is speaking, it might be acknowledging that she too was broken and put back together, literally, as she and other spirits combine in Enard, offering her brother a similar continuation beyond death. The phrase could also be read more literally if we interpret FNAF 4's events as part of William's experiments. Perhaps Putting him back together refers to reassembling the child psychologically after the traumatic testing he's enduring, or reconstructing his memories and identity after they've been fragmented by hallucinogenic gas and fear. Or the sinister interpretation here is that William is acknowledging his experiments have broken his son's mind and promising to repair the damage, though whether this promise is kept or even genuine is questionable given William's character throughout the series. What we can say with reasonable certainty is that the Fredbear plush serves multiple purposes in the story. As a physical object, it's a surveillance device allowing William to monitor his son, probably out of a twisted combination of protective impulse and experimental interest. As a narrative device, it provides exposition and foreshadowing, guiding players through the minigames and hinting at deeper mysteries. As a symbol, it represents the false comfort we seek in childhood, the security object that ultimately cannot protect us from real dangers. And as a mystery, it embodies the way Five Nights at Freddy's blurs lines between technology and supernatural, between protection and control, between parent and experimenter. The crying child trusts the plush implicitly, following its guidance, seeking its comfort, believing its promises. This trust is either the most innocent thing in a dark story, a child finding solace in a toy, or the most tragic, a child being manipulated by his father through technology disguised as affection. The plush might be his guardian angel, trying desperately to protect him from the dangers around him, or it might be his jailer, the means by which he's kept under constant surveillance for William's purposes. It's possible, even likely, that it's both at different times, starting as William's tool and becoming something more after the child's death, a vessel for spirits trying to help where William only exploited. Every time we see that golden bear plush in the minigames, we should feel the ambiguity, the uncertainty, of whether its presence is comfort or control, help or hindrance, love or obsession. That ambiguity is central to understanding the Afton family dynamic as revealed through FNAF 4, a family where love and cruelty intertwine, where protection and harm come from the same source, where even something as simple as a child's toy becomes a tool for purposes far darker than its innocent appearance suggests. The Fredbear plush mystery remains partially unsolved, and that's appropriate, because like so much in this game, it exists in the space between multiple possibilities, refusing to resolve into simple answers, and keeping us forever wondering whether what seems like guidance might be manipulation, whether what seems like comfort might be surveillance, whether the voice promising to put us back together will save us or damn us. If you've tried to solve Five Nights at Freddy's 4 completely, you've inevitably encountered it, the box. After completing Night 7, also called Nightmare Mode, players are presented with an image of a metal chest, secured with two prominent locks, sitting against a background that suggests mystery and finality. Text appears above it. Perhaps some things are best left forgotten for now. Players immediately tried everything they could think of to open it, inputting codes, clicking furiously, examining the game files for clues, but nothing worked. The box remains locked, its contents unknown, and nearly a decade later, and it has become the most famous unsolved mystery in the entire Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, a testament to creator Scott Cawthon's ability to craft enduring enigmas. The box first appeared in August 2015, when FNAF 4 was released, marketed as the final chapter of the story. The community's assumption was logical. This was the final game, so surely it would contain definitive answers, a conclusion that would explain everything built up through the previous entries. The box seemed positioned as exactly that, a final revelation that would reward dedicated fans who reached the game's hardest challenge. But when nobody could figure out how to open it, when no combination of actions or secrets revealed its contents, speculation began that the box wasn't meant to be opened, at least not in FNAF 4 itself, and perhaps it would be opened in a future game or supplementary material. Perhaps its contents would be revealed through careful analysis of existing clues. The community approached it with the intensity that had characterized every previous FNAF mystery, confident that eventually someone would figure it out. Scott Cawthon himself addressed the box in various communications with the community, and his statements only deepened the mystery. In one Steam post, he expressed disappointment that despite the community's incredible track record of solving his puzzles, nobody had found the pieces needed to understand FNAF 4's story. He implied that everything needed to solve the mystery, including presumably the box, was present in the first 4 games, but that players weren't seeing it. This suggested the box could be opened through knowledge, and that understanding the story would reveal what's inside without needing to physically open it in the game. But then came a crucial development in August 2015, shortly after the game's release, when Scott posted a statement that reframed the entire mystery. He wrote, "For now, the box will remain closed, and I don't intend to tell anyone what's inside. What's in the box? It's the pieces put together. But the pieces and the story are extremely fluid. The story is different now than it was when I started making the game, and I think the story is going to continue to evolve even after the game is finished." This was a remarkable admission from a game developer. The story he intended to tell had changed during development, and even after release, it continued to evolve. The box contained the answer to the original story, but that story no longer existed in its original form. This revelation transformed the box from a puzzle with a definite answer into something more philosophical. A representation of a story that might have been, a solution that became obsolete as the narrative evolved. Scott was being honest about his creative process. He had a direction in mind when he started FNAF 4, a conclusion he was building toward, symbolized by the box's contents. But as he developed the game, as he considered fan reactions and his own evolving vision, the story shifted. What was in the box no longer fit the story he was now telling. Opening it would reveal answers to questions he was no longer asking, explanations for a narrative that had been superseded by a new direction. In the years following, Scott's statements about the box became more definitive in their ambiguity. In an August 2024 interview with YouTuber Dorco, conducted during a FNAF's 10th anniversary celebrations, Scott addressed the box directly, providing what might be his final word on the subject. "I feel that there is something there, and I make the roads to get there for that to be revealed. But then sometimes, when things do progress, the roads aren't always the same roads as the ones that had been planned before. And so what that means is, even though at the time, something was definitely reaching out to be there, and I could feel that it was there, the progression of the story didn't go there, and so those strings never got pulled on, and the other half of that idea remained in the ether, in my subconscious. All of that to say, there is something in the box, but I never pursued that, and I don't know if I can find it again." This statement is both a confirmation and a denial. Yes, there was something in the box. No, Scott never explicitly revealed it. Maybe he could never reveal it now even if he wanted to, because he's forgotten, or because the story has evolved so far from that original vision that the answer no longer makes sense. It's a rare moment of creative vulnerability from a developer who built an empire on mystery, an acknowledgement that not every thread can be tied, not every answer preserved, not every story element pursued to its conclusion. So what might have been in the box? Theories abound, each attempting to reconstruct what Scott originally intended before the story shifted. One popular interpretation, and supported by various community analyses of the survival logbook and game symbolism, suggests the box might contain pieces of the crying child's story, possibly representing his remains symbolically, or containing the truth about what happened to him after death. The Happiest Day minigame in FNAF 3 shows a child at a birthday party being freed, and many theorists believe this is the crying child finding peace. The box might represent that peace, the conclusion of his story, the final rest he deserves after his traumatic death. Opening it would mean releasing him, letting him go, acknowledging that his story is over and he can finally be at peace. Another theory ties the box to William Afton's experiments. If the box represents answers to FNAF 4's mysteries, and those mysteries increasingly appear connected to experimentation and observation chambers, perhaps the box contains evidence of those experiments, documentation or recordings, or even physical materials related to William's research. Opening it would expose the full extent of what William did, the children he experimented on, the methods he used, the data he collected. This interpretation frames the box as containing sins rather than solutions, horrors that are perhaps better left hidden, because knowing them doesn't help anyone, only spreads the trauma further. A third theory suggests the box is metatextual, containing the true lore of a FNAF as Scott originally envisioned it, before he expanded the series. In this reading, FNAF 4 was meant to be the finale, the conclusion that would tie together the first 4 games into a complete narrative. The box would have revealed how everything connected, what the Purple Man's true identity and motivations were, what happened to all the spirits, whether there was hope for peace or only eternal suffering. But when Scott decided to continue the series, adding sister location and subsequent games, he had to leave some of those original answers behind, pursuing new narrative directions that contradicted or complicated what he'd initially planned. The box then contains the alternate timeline, the story that might have been if FNAF had ended with Game 4. From a narrative design perspective, the unopened box serves a valuable function regardless of what it might have contained. It creates perpetual mystery, and ensuring that no matter how much we learn about Five Nights at Freddy's, there's always something more, always something just beyond reach. It reminds us that not all questions have answers, not all mysteries get solved, not all stories achieve complete closure. In a franchise built on incomplete information and community speculation, the box is the ultimate embodiment of those principles. A locked door will never fully open, a secret that remains tantalizingly close, but forever inaccessible. There's something deeply unsettling about this uncertainty in a different way than the game's horror is unsettling. The nightmare animatronics can kill you, but they're predictable, followable, survivable. The box offers something worse, the promise of answers without the ability to access them, knowledge that exists but remains beyond reach. It's frustrating, yes, but it's also brilliant storytelling because it mimics real life, where not everything gets explained, where some truths die with the people who knew them, where we have to learn to live with uncertainty rather than definitive answers. The community's reaction to Scott's revelations about the box has been mixed. Some fans feel betrayed, believing they were promised a solution that was then deliberately withheld. Others appreciate the honesty, respecting Scott for admitting that his creative process isn't perfect, that sometimes ideas don't work out, that story evolution means leaving some threads dangling. Still, others treat it as an ongoing challenge, convinced that the true answer is still out there. If we look hard enough, if we dig deep enough into subsequent games and books and supplementary materials, the search for the box's contents has become its own mini-fandom within the larger FNAF community, complete with increasingly elaborate theories and connections. What we can say definitively is that the box represents something significant to FNAF 4's original narrative. Something Scott believed would be satisfying or meaningful as a conclusion to the story. It likely connects to the crying child, given the context of the game, possibly explaining what happened to him after death, whether he found peace, whether he was put back together as the Fredbear plush promised. It might have connected to the identity debates, definitively confirming whether the crying child and Michael are separate people or the same person, what their fates were, how they related to the larger story. It probably contained answers about William's motivations and methods, about the experiments hinted at through sister location, about the purpose behind the suffering inflicted on the Afton children. But we'll likely never know for certain. The box remains closed, its locks unbroken, its contents existing somewhere in the space between Scott's original vision and the community's countless theories. In a way, that's fitting for Five Nights at Freddy's 4, a game that exists in the space between nightmare and reality, between childhood and adulthood, between past tragedies and present consequences. The box is another threshold we can't cross, another boundary we must respect, another reminder that some mysteries persist not because they're unsolvable, but because their solutions exist in a version of the story we'll never experience. Perhaps, as the text suggests, some things are best left forgotten. Perhaps the box contains truths that would be too painful to confront, answers that would diminish the story rather than enhance it, conclusions that would feel unsatisfying now that we've moved so far beyond FNAF 4's original vision. Or perhaps Scott is right, that he simply can't find the answer anymore, that it's been lost to the evolution of his creative process, buried under years of new lore and revised directions. Either way, the box stands as Five Nights at Freddy's 4's greatest mystery, a locked chest that will likely remain locked forever, a promise of revelation that transmuted into an acceptance of mystery, a conclusion that became an ellipsis, a definitive answer that dissolved into infinite possibility. And maybe, in a franchise built on asking questions more than answering them, that's exactly as it should be. One of the most crucial pieces of information Five Nights at Freddy's 4 provides isn't found through complex puzzle solving or deep theoretical analysis. It's hiding in plain sight, presented through a simple Easter egg that resolved years of community debate about when exactly the game takes place in the franchise's timeline. Understanding why this date matters, what it tells us about the game's events, and how it connects to the broader Five Nights at Freddy's chronology is essential to grasping the full significance of what we're experiencing in those nightmarish bedrooms and those tragic minigames. The Easter egg appears in the Night 3 minigame, the scene where the crying child returns home and finds himself alone in his bedroom. His television displays static, but if players click on it repeatedly while moving into it, something extraordinary happens. The static clears, replaced briefly by a commercial for Fredbear and Friends, a show featuring the Golden Bear and his animatronic companions. Crucially, the commercial displays a copyright date, 1983, This single number, shown for just a moment during an easily missed interaction, confirmed what many theorists had suspected and what others had argued against, that Five Nights at Freddy's 4's minigames take place in 1983, making them chronologically the earliest events we witness in the mainline games. This date had implications that rippled through every existing theory about the franchise's timeline. For years, the community had been trying to determine which byte the game depicted, the byte of 83 or the infamous byte of 87 that Phone Guy mentions in the first game. The number 87 appeared throughout the first game's promotional material, and Phone Guy's description of someone surviving without their frontal lobe after being bitten suggested a significant incident in the franchise's history. When FNAF 4 showed a child being bitten by an animatronic, many assumed this must be the byte of 87, the event Phone Guy referenced. But the 1983 date changed everything. The byte we witness in FNAF 4 isn't the byte of 87. It's an earlier incident, occurring 4 years before Phone Guy's referenced event. This means there are two separate byte incidents in the franchise's lore. The byte of 83, which kills the crying child during his birthday party at Fredbear's family diner, and the byte of 87, which presumably happens at a later Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location and somehow leaves the victim alive despite catastrophic brain damage. The significance of this clarification cannot be overstated. It means the timeline extends further back than we initially understood, that Fredbear's family diner operated years before the FNAF 2 location, that the Afton family's tragedies began even earlier than theorized. Placing FNAF 4's minigames in 1983 also establishes the sequence of deaths in the Afton family with more certainty. The crying child dies in 1983, becoming the first Afton child to perish. Elizabeth's death in Circus Baby, which we see in sister location, likely happens afterward, possibly shortly after, given that Circus Baby's Pizza World appears to have been a relatively new venture before being shut down following her death. This ordering matters because it influences how we understand William's motivations and the development of his obsessions. The crying child's death might be what drives William to create the deadly Funtime animatronics, his first attempt at understanding death and possession, or it might reinforce existing tendencies, pushing him further into darkness he'd already embraced. The 1983 date also helps us understand Fredbear's family diner in relation to the larger Fazbear entertainment chain. We know from various sources that Fredbear's was the original location, the starting point before the expansion to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza restaurants. The 1983 setting confirms this was still relatively early in the company's history, and before the missing children incident that Phone Guy mentions happening at a previous location, before the FNAF 2 restaurant with its toy animatronics, before much of the franchise's documented horror. It's the beginning, the point where everything went wrong, where the foundation was laid for all the tragedies that follow. Interestingly, the 1983 date also appears in sister location. We're entering 1983 into the keypad in the private room, activates the cameras showing FNAF 4 locations. This connection reinforces the link between the minigames and the underground facility, suggesting that even in 1983, or shortly thereafter, the observation chambers existed. This raises questions about exactly when William Afton began his experiments, whether they predated his son's death or were a response to it. If the facility existed in 1983, was the crying child himself subjected to experiments before the birthday party? Did William's surveillance of his son through the Fredbear plush serve experimental purposes even then? Or were the observation chambers built later, recreating the 1983 setting as part of experiments on other subjects, possibly Michael as punishment for his role in his brother's death? The year 1983 also has significance in the broader cultural and technological context. Springlock suits, as Phone Guy describes them, represent an ambitious but flawed technology, the kind of innovation that makes sense in an era when animatronics were still relatively novel, and companies were willing to take risks to create unique entertainment experiences. By 1983, animatronics had become more common in restaurants and theme parks, but safety standards were still developing. The idea that Fazbear Entertainment would use Springlock technology, knowing its risks but prioritizing versatility and cost saving over absolute safety, fits perfectly in this time period, before lawsuits and regulations would make such obviously dangerous technology untenable. Understanding that the bite happens in 1983 also colors how we interpret the crying child's death scene. The flat line we hear, the life ending on that hospital bed, becomes even more tragic knowing this happens in the early 80s, before modern trauma medicine, before some of the techniques that might have saved him existed. The springlock failure that crushes his skull is catastrophic, and medical science in 1983 simply couldn't repair that kind of damage. There's no ambiguity here, and no possibility that he survived with injuries. The crying child dies, and he dies in 1983, becoming the franchise's first chronological victim. This timeline placement also means everything that happens in the subsequent games, all the horror, all the death, all the haunted animatronics and trapped souls, can be traced back to events happening in or around this time period. The bite of 83 becomes one of the earliest tragedies we experience directly. The first we're positioned to emotionally connect with because we've spent 5 nights watching this child's fear, experiencing his family's dysfunction, dreading the moment we know is coming. Making it definitively 1983, placing it firmly at the start of the timeline, gives it the weight of an origin point, the moment when the Afton family's tragedy truly begins, and the date also affects how we understand Michael Afton's age and development through the series, assuming the theory that he appears in multiple games holds true. If he's old enough in 1983 to be bullying his younger brother along with his friends, he's probably somewhere between 10 and 15 years old, depending on interpretation. This means by FNAF 2, set in 1987, he'd be 14 to 19. By FNAF 1, commonly placed in the early 1990s, he'd be a young adult. By sister location, which happens at some point after FNAF 1, he's old enough to seek employment and follow his father's instructions independently. The 1983 date anchors all of these age progressions, helping us understand Michael as a character who grows from a bullying child to a guilt-ridden adult over the course of a decade or more. Perhaps most importantly, the 1983 date tells us something about Scott Cawthon's intentions for the story. By including such a specific, easily findable Easter egg revealing the date, he was making a definitive statement. This is when these events occur. This is where the timeline begins. This is the foundation upon which everything else is built. It's not hidden in obscure codes or requiring elaborate puzzle solving. It's right there, accessible to anyone who takes a moment to interact with the television. Suggesting Scott wanted this information to be found, wanted the community to understand the chronology, wanted us to know we're witnessing the beginning. The 1983 date transforms Five Nights at Freddy's 4 from being just another entry in the series to being the origin story, the genesis moment when the Afton family's tragedy begins and sets in motion all the horrors that follow. It's the year when a child's fear was proven justified, when a birthday became a funeral, when a family began to break apart in ways that would eventually destroy them all. It's the year when spring-lock technology failed catastrophically, leading to the suits being decommissioned and relocated to back rooms where they would eventually claim other victims. It's the year that William Afton, already building his entertainment empire, lost his youngest son and potentially began the obsessive quest to understand death that would lead to so many more deaths. It's the year Michael Afton's life changed forever, burdening him with guilt that would define every subsequent action he takes. 1983 is where it all begins, in a diner named after a golden bear, on a stage where mechanical jaws close on a child's skull, in a hospital room where a small body stops breathing, in a moment that reverberates through every subsequent game, every haunted animatronic, every security guard's desperate overnight survival attempt. The date is simple, just 4 digits on a television screen, but it carries the weight of the entire franchise's timeline, anchoring us to a specific moment in history when childhood ended violently for one small boy, and the nightmare began for everyone else. That's why the 1983 date matters, why it's worth spending time understanding and appreciating, because it tells us exactly when the horror started, and it reminds us that every subsequent tragedy, every possessed animatronic, every jump scare, every death, traces back to this foundational moment when innocence was crushed between mechanical jaws that should never have closed. Beyond the main gameplay and the critical minigames, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is packed with hidden details, Easter eggs, and additional content that provide crucial context for understanding both the game's immediate story and its connections to the broader franchise. These elements range from minigames accessible between nights to background details visible in the main game's environment, from audio cues that reveal hidden truths to visual glitches that hint at supernatural presences. Each piece adds another layer to the mystery, another clue to decoding exactly what's happening in this nightmare house and why. The most notable piece of additional content is Fun with Plush Trap, and a minigame accessible between nights that serves as both a mechanical change of pace and a lore delivery system. In this game, players control a flashlight beam in a dark hallway, trying to freeze a small animatronic called Plush Trap on a glowing X mark on the floor. Succeed, and 2 hours are removed from the next night, providing a gameplay advantage. Fail, and you proceed to the full night without any time reduction. But the lore implications are what make Fun with Plush Trap fascinating rather than just a diversion. Plush Trap itself is a miniature version of Springtrap, the animatronic that appears in FNAF 3 after William Afton becomes trapped in the Spring Bonnie suit. The fact that a Plush Trap toy or animatronic exists has puzzled theorists, leading to several possible explanations. One interpretation suggests the character might have existed as a merchandise item before William's Springlock failure, meaning Springtrap wasn't just William in a suit, but referenced an already existing character design. Another popular theory proposes that Fun with Plush Trap isn't happening in 1983, but much later, possibly during Michael's nightmares after the events of FNAF 3. This latter interpretation fits with the theory that Michael is the protagonist experiencing nightmares in the present day while processing trauma from throughout his life, with elements from different time periods blending together in nightmare logic. The Plush Trap hallway itself appears to be significant because it shows up on the sister location breaker room map and which many interpret as confirming it's part of the same facility or observation chamber setup as the main bedroom. This connection suggests fun with plush trap might represent another form of fear testing, another experiment in the underground complex, though the exact nature of this connection remains debated in the community. The challenge of stopping plush trap on the mark could be a test of reaction time, focus under pressure, or ability to control fear responses when facing an approaching threat. The fact that it rewards players with reduced time in the next night suggests it might be training, conditioning subjects to perform better in the main fear experiment. Beyond plush trap, the minigames themselves contain numerous small details that reveal character relationships and story beats. We've discussed the major points: the crying child's fear, Michael's bullying, the birthday party tragedy. But there are smaller moments worth noting. The scene where the crying child is locked in the back room, where we see Fredbear and Spring Bonnie suits hanging in the darkness. This is likely a service room or storage area at Fredbear's family diner, and the child's terror at being trapped there suggests previous bad experiences or an understanding that these places are dangerous. The detail of the child locked in with the suits foreshadows the series later reveals about William Afton using such rooms for murder, the child instinctively knowing he's in danger, even if he doesn't understand the specifics. There's the scene where a purple figure, consistently used throughout the series to represent William Afton, is seen backstage helping someone into a springlock suit. This moment has generated significant analysis because the purple figure moves quickly to close the door when he realizes the crying child is watching, suggesting this might be something that shouldn't be witnessed. The most innocent interpretation is that it's simply an employee being helped into a costume, and the door is being closed for privacy or to prevent children from seeing behind the scenes. But given what we learn about William Afton throughout the series, many theorists read darker implications into this moment, suggesting it might relate to his later crimes or experiments, with the child witnessing something that contributes to his fear and marks him as someone who needs careful monitoring. The girl with pigtails who talks to the crying child during one minigame delivers exposition that many believe reflects actual franchise lore. You'd better watch out. I hear they come to life at night, and if you die, they hide your body and never tell anyone. This could be dismissed as creepy schoolyard talk, but in the context of Five Nights at Freddy's, it's uncomfortably accurate to what we later learn happens. The animatronics do come to life at night due to possession. Bodies are hidden, stuffed into suits. This girl is speaking what sounds like scary stories, but aligns with truth. And the question becomes, how does she know? Is she repeating rumors that have spread about the restaurant? Has she witnessed something herself? The game doesn't provide clear answers, leaving her knowledge as one of many small mysteries. Audio elements in the main game provide their own mysteries. Most famously, a distorted version of Phone Guy's FNAF1 call can be heard in the background ambience if you slow it down and reverse it. The phrases are recognizable to anyone who played the first game. There's been a bit of a change in company policy concerning use of the suits and other snippets from that iconic call. This Easter egg seems to confirm that Michael is the protagonist, as mentioned earlier, since the FNAF1 audio wouldn't make sense in the crying child's nightmares, but would fit perfectly in Michael's dreams, mixing memories of his time as Mike Schmidt with the trauma of his brother's death. There are also the IV drip, flowers, and pills visible in the crying child's hospital room, environmental details that confirm the severity of his injuries. And these aren't just decorative elements, but evidence of the medical interventions being attempted. the futile efforts to save a child whose skull has been catastrophically damaged. The flowers suggest family or visitors, a normal gesture of hope in an utterly abnormal situation. The pills might be pain management or medications to reduce brain swelling. The IV provides necessary fluids and medications to a body that can no longer do these things for itself. These clinical details ground the supernatural horror in medical reality, reminding us that before any possession or ghostly continuation, there's a very real child dying in a very real hospital. The Night 6 minigame provides the most emotionally devastating details. We see the crying child's plushies arranged around his hospital bed. We hear Michael's apology, and we see the Fredbear plush deliver its final cryptic message, and we hear the flatline that confirms death. But there are additional small details. The child's eyes closing in the final frame, the way the screen fades, the particular timing of everything suggesting a specific medical progression. This isn't a sudden death. It's a slow one, the kind where there's time to say goodbye but no hope of recovery, where everyone knows what's coming but must wait for it anyway. The nighttime sections contain their own hidden details beyond the main gameplay. The bed behind you, when you turn to flash it with your flashlight, sometimes displays elements that change the nature of what you're seeing. The freckles multiply there, yes, but the bed itself is significant, covered with what appears to be a green and white plaid pattern that matches bedding seen elsewhere in the game. When Nightmare appears, he manifests directly from the bed, suggesting the ultimate fear isn't something approaching from outside, but something that emerges from within your own supposed safe space, literally rising from where you sleep. The closet contains Nightmare Foxy in his various stages of manifestation, but it also contains clothes, toys, normal childhood objects that become sinister through context. The juxtaposition of mundane items with nightmare threats reinforces the invasion of normal space by horror. A closet should hold clothes and forgotten toys. Having it contain a massive animatronic fox with a gleaming hook transforms everyday storage into a death trap, making the familiar dangerous. There are Easter eggs in the form of rare screens and events. Some players have reported seeing brief flashes of different images or hearing specific sounds that don't appear consistently, suggesting either random elements or conditions that trigger certain events. These might be related to save file data, specific date and time settings, or random chance. The rarity of some of these encounters means they're not universally verified, creating a secondary mystery about what's truly in the game versus what might be creepypasta or misremembering. The Halloween edition update added its own elements, introducing Jacko Bonnie, Jacko Chica, Nightmare Mangle, and Nightmare Balloon Boy as alternative characters with their own behaviors and mechanics. While these are generally considered non-canon, are fun variations rather than story-relevant content. Their existence shows Scott's willingness to experiment with the game's formula and provide additional challenges for players who mastered the original content. Some theorists attempt to find lore significance in these characters anyway, suggesting they might represent additional experiments or variations William Afton tested. But this seems unlikely given their explicitly Halloween-themed presentation. What all these hidden details and additional content pieces do is create a sense that Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is deeper than it initially appears, that there are always more layers to uncover, more connections to make, more secrets to discover. Even players who've completed the game multiple times might not have seen every detail. I might not have noticed every environmental storytelling element, might not have caught every audio cue or visual reference. This density of content rewards careful attention and repeated playthroughs, while also ensuring that the game remains mysterious, even for those who think they've figured everything out. The accumulation of these details, from Plushtrap's timeline implications, to the hospital room's medical equipment, to the Pigtail Girl's uncannily accurate rumors, to the audio Easter eggs confirming Michael's involvement, creates a picture of FNAF 4 as a game where nothing is accidental, where every element serves multiple purposes. A detail that initially seems like atmospheric flavor turns out to contain lore significance. A minigame that appears to be a simple diversion connects to underground facility maps, and an audio track that sounds like ambient noise contains reversed phone calls from another game. This is intentional design. Scott Cawthon constructing a puzzle box where every surface conceals another layer, where the more you look, the more you find, where solving one mystery reveals 3 more. Understanding and appreciating these hidden details is essential to fully grasping Five Nights at Freddy's 4, because they're not optional bonus content. They're integral parts of the story Scott wanted to tell. The main nights and mini-games provide the framework, but these additional elements fill in crucial gaps, confirm or complicate theories, and demonstrate the interconnectedness of the franchise. They show us that FNAF 4 isn't isolated but deeply connected to every other game, and that its mysteries echo forward and backward through the timeline. That nothing here exists in isolation. Each Easter egg is another thread in the web, another piece of the larger picture, another clue in the endless mystery that is Five Nights at Freddy's. And for a franchise built on community detective work and collaborative solving, these hidden details are what keep the investigation alive, what ensure that years after release, people are still finding new connections, still debating new theories, still discovering that the game has depths they hadn't yet plumbed. When we talk about horror games, we usually discuss mechanics of fear, jump scares, atmospheric tension, resource management, the satisfaction of surviving against overwhelming odds. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 has all of these elements, and they're executed effectively. The nightmare animatronics are genuinely terrifying. The audio-based gameplay creates constant tension. The jump scares are brutal and disorienting. But what makes FNAF 4 the darkest entry in the franchise isn't its mechanical horror. It's the psychological horror lurking beneath the surface, the implications of what we're seeing, the real-world parallels that make this more than just a scary video game. This is horror that lingers because it touches on traumas that exist beyond fiction. At its core, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is about child abuse, whether we're willing to frame it that starkly or not. The crying child experiences daily torment from his older brother, psychological abuse that manifests as constant fear of the animatronics he encounters at his father's restaurant. He's locked in rooms. He's cornered and threatened. He's mocked for his legitimate fears. His trauma is treated as entertainment by the people around him. And all of this occurs while his father watches, literally watches through hidden cameras, monitoring his son's distress without intervening in meaningful ways. This is a family that has fundamentally failed to protect its most vulnerable member, allowing and sometimes actively causing him psychological harm. Michael's bullying is presented through the game's pixelated minigames with a certain distance that softens its impact. But if we describe what's actually happening without the visual filter, it's disturbing. An older child repeatedly terrorizes his younger sibling, exploiting his specific phobias, recruiting friends to help corner and frighten him, on escalating to a prank that involves forcing the child's head into an animatronic's mouth despite his obvious terror and protests. This isn't harmless sibling rivalry. It's systematic targeting of someone powerless to defend himself. Cruelty that builds over days toward a horrific climax. Yes, Michael is himself a child, likely not fully understanding the consequences of his actions, but that doesn't erase the harm done or the pattern of behavior that leads to tragedy. The experimentation angle makes this psychological horror even more disturbing. If William Afton did construct observation chambers designed to induce fear in children, if he did subject test subjects to sustained terror through hallucinogenic gas and costume-wearing performers or actual nightmare animatronics, and then we're talking about something that transcends entertainment horror into real-world monstrosity. Child experimentation exists in our darkest historical chapters. Unethical medical testing, psychological studies that traumatize subjects for data, abuse disguised as research. FNAF 4's connections to sister location and dittophobia invoke these horrors, suggesting William Afton represents that particular evil, the scientist or doctor or authority figure who violates trust and exploits power over vulnerable populations for curiosity or ambition. The setting in a bedroom intensifies this horror because bedrooms are supposed to be sacred spaces, particularly for children. It's where they sleep, where they're at their most vulnerable, where they should be able to retreat from the world and feel absolutely safe. Violating that space and turning it into a battleground or worse, a laboratory, is a profound betrayal of the basic security every child deserves. Many abuse survivors report that their bedrooms became sites of trauma, places where they should have been safe but weren't, where nighttime became a source of dread rather than rest. FNAF 4 mechanizes this experience, literally gamifying the inability to sleep peacefully, the need to remain hypervigilant even in supposedly safe spaces, the knowledge that monsters can reach you even in your own bed. There's also the horror of family dysfunction and the inadequacy of parental protection. Where is the crying child's mother throughout all this? We never see her, never hear her mentioned. Her absence itself a mystery that suggests either death, abandonment, or removal from the family situation. William, the father, I was present but utterly failing his parental duties. Rather than protecting his son from bullying, rather than addressing Michael's behavior, rather than validating the crying child's legitimate fears, he appears to be using those fears for his own purposes, monitoring them through surveillance equipment, possibly studying them, certainly not ending them. This is a father who has prioritized his business, his experiments, his obsessions over his children's well-being. The birthday party setting for the tragedy compounds the horror because birthdays should be celebrations, moments of joy and acknowledgement, times when a child is meant to feel special and loved. Instead, the crying child's birthday becomes the day of his death, the ultimate perversion of what should be a positive experience. Birthdays carry particular psychological weight, marking the passage of time, celebrating existence, often serving as anchors for childhood memory. To have that day become the day of ultimate trauma or death transforms every subsequent birthday into a reminder, a haunting, a day that can never again be fully separated from loss. The medical aspect, the hospital vigil, adds another layer of real horror. Many people have experienced keeping watch over dying loved ones, seeing them in hospital beds surrounded by equipment, watching monitors, hoping for recovery while knowing it's not coming. The minigame depicting the crying child's hospital stay is emotionally devastating because it's familiar to anyone who's experienced serious illness or injury in their family. The plushies arranged around the bed, the attempt to bring comfort into a sterile medical environment, the family members present but unable to help, the steady beep of monitors until the flatline comes. These are real experiences, real traumas, real grief. FNAF4 doesn't shy away from this, doesn't abstract it into something fantastical. It presents death as medical and final, before any supernatural elements enter the story. The guilt that presumably haunts Michael afterward represents another form of psychological horror. The weight of irrevocable actions. Many people carry guilt about things they've done, mistakes they've made, harm they've caused. But killing someone, even accidentally, even as a child, even through a prank gone wrong, that's a burden that potentially never lifts. Michael's entire arc through the franchise, if we follow the theory that he's the protagonist of multiple games, is about trying to atone for this one action, trying to fix what can't be fixed, trying to save people he couldn't save before. This is the horror of knowing you destroyed someone else's life and possibly your own in the process, of waking up every day remembering what you did, of never being able to take it back or make it right. The surveillance elements invoke modern anxieties about privacy, observation, the panopticon effect where being watched changes behavior and erodes autonomy. The crying child, if he knows about the cameras or suspects the plush is watching him, lives under constant observation without consent, his every moment monitored by his father. This is a violation of privacy that has particular resonance in our current era of surveillance capitalism, smart home devices, and debates about children's privacy rights. William Afton watching his son might use technology from the 80s, cameras and walkie-talkies, but the psychological impact mirrors modern concerns about digital surveillance, data collection, and who has the right to observe whom without their knowledge or permission. The helplessness that defines much of FNAF 4's experience both in minigames and night sections represents a fundamental psychological horror, the inability to escape or change your situation. The crying child can't stop his brother from bullying him. He can't refuse to go to his birthday party despite his fears. He can't escape the animatronic's jaws. During the nights, you can survive until 6 a.m., but the next night always comes. There's no winning, only postponing loss, only temporary survival. And this mirrors real experiences of trauma, where you feel trapped in situations you can't change, where each day is just about making it through to the next one, where there's no victory condition, only endurance. It's exhausting, hopeless, the opposite of empowering gameplay. And that's precisely why it's so psychologically effective and disturbing. The transformation of entertainment into threat, fun into fear, carries its own horror. Animatronics are supposed to be fun. Restaurants are supposed to be enjoyable. Birthday parties are supposed to be celebrations. FNAF4 systematically inverts every expectation of childhood joy, revealing the potential for harm hidden in seemingly innocent things. This generates a specific type of dread, the uncanny valley of familiar things made wrong, safe spaces revealed as dangerous, untrusted entertainment transformed into threat. It suggests that nowhere is truly safe, nothing is purely innocent. Danger can hide behind the most benign facades. For children who play these games or hear these stories, it potentially affects how they view animatronics, mascots, theme restaurants, birthday parties, implanting associations between these normal childhood experiences and horror. The question of whether the nightmares are real or dreams, whether they're experiences in an underground laboratory or psychological manifestations, doesn't actually diminish the horror, it multiplies it. If they're just dreams, they represent such severe psychological trauma that the mind manufactures these horrors nightly. If they're real experiments, they represent systematic torture disguised as research. Either way, someone is suffering intensely, either psychologically or physically or both. The ambiguity doesn't create a safe distance. It creates a double threat, the possibility that both interpretations are somehow true simultaneously. What makes Five Nights at Freddy's 4 the darkest entry in the franchise is how it takes all these elements, child abuse, family dysfunction, experimentation, grief, guilt, trauma, surveillance, helplessness, and weaves them together into a game that's superficially about surviving against monster robots, but fundamentally about the ways childhood innocence can be destroyed, the ways families can fail their children, the ways authority figures can abuse power, the ways past actions can haunt you forever, the ways fear can be weaponized and studied and inflicted deliberately. It's dark because it's not really about supernatural horror. It's about human horror, the terrible things people do to each other, and especially to children, the wounds that don't heal, the traumas that become defining, the guilt that never lift. This is why FNAF 4 hits differently than other entries in the series. The first game was about survival against possessed animatronics, scary but ultimately fantastic. The second game added lore about murdered children, but maintained the player's position as an outside observer, a security guard doing a job. The third game brought back Springtrap and played with horror attraction concepts, but the fourth game made it personal and psychological, putting us in the perspective of someone experiencing family trauma, someone who is either being actively harmed or reliving harm they caused, and someone for whom the horror is intimately connected to childhood experiences that should have been safe but weren't. It asks us to empathize not just with victims, but potentially with perpetrators processing their guilt. It shows us suffering without offering easy resolution or supernatural explanations that might sanitize the psychological reality. The psychological horror of Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is the horror of recognizing that the real monsters aren't necessarily the animatronics with too many teeth. They're the systemic failures, the abusive family members, the neglectful parents, the bullies who don't understand consequences, the experimenters who prioritize curiosity over ethics, the ordinary humans who create suffering through their choices and actions. The nightmare animatronics are just the physical manifestation of these deeper horrors, giving them form and teeth and claws. But the true darkness lies in what they represent. Childhoods destroyed, families broken, trust betrayed, innocence crushed, both literally and figuratively, between mechanical jaws that close and don't release. That's the real horror, and it's darker than any jump scare could ever be. As we reach the end of our journey through Five Nights at Freddy's 4's darkest secrets, we're left with a picture of a game that's far more complex and disturbing than its surface presentation suggests. What initially appears to be another entry in a series of horror games about surviving against killer animatronics reveals itself as a profound exploration of family trauma, guilt, psychological experimentation, and the ways childhood innocence can be violated and destroyed. Every element we've examined, from the nightmare animatronics with their impossible teeth, to the crying child's daily terror, to Michael's lifelong guilt, to William's underground observation chambers, contributes to a narrative that's as much about human darkness as supernatural horror. The bedroom where we fight for survival each night isn't just a game level. It's a representation of violated safety, a sacred space transformed into a battleground or laboratory. The animatronics that stalk us aren't just obstacles to overcome. They're manifestations of fear and guilt, physical embodiments of psychological trauma that can't be defeated, only survived. The minigames aren't just story delivery mechanisms. They're windows into a family's collapse, are showing us the moment when careless cruelty became irrevocable tragedy, when a brother's bullying killed his sibling, when a father's neglect or obsession failed to protect his children. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 asks uncomfortable questions and doesn't provide easy answers. How much guilt should Michael Afton carry for an accident that occurred when he was a child? How do we reconcile sympathy for his obvious remorse with the fact that his actions directly caused a death? What drove William Afton to potentially experiment on children in underground chambers, studying their fear with scientific detachment? Was he trying to understand what happened to his son, trying to bring him back somehow? Or was there always something broken in him that made such cruelty possible? How do we process the crying child story? A boy whose legitimate fears were mocked until they killed him, whose final moments were spent in a hospital bed while a mechanical voice promised to put him back together. The game also asks questions about how we create and consume horror entertainment. What does it mean that we're playing through traumatic experiences, surviving nightmare scenarios that represent real psychological damage? Is there something voyeuristic about experiencing these family tragedies as gameplay? Or does the interactive nature of games allow for a different kind of empathy, forcing us to experience situations from perspectives we'd never otherwise access? Five Nights at Freddy's 4 doesn't provide clear answers, but it makes us think about these questions by presenting horror that's uncomfortably rooted in real psychological and family dynamics. The mysteries that remain unsolved, the box that will likely never open, the questions about who's really speaking through the Fredbear plush, the uncertainty about whether the experiments were real or how extensive they were. These aren't failures of storytelling, but acknowledgements that not everything can be neatly resolved. Real trauma doesn't have clear endings. Real families don't wrap up their dysfunctions with tidy conclusions. Real guilt doesn't lift just because time passes or because you've suffered enough. By leaving these elements ambiguous, Five Nights at Freddy's 4 respects the complexity of what it's depicting, refusing to simplify psychological horror into something easily digestible. What we can say definitively is that Five Nights at Freddy's 4 represents the franchise at its darkest and most psychologically complex. It's where the lore shifts from being primarily about possessed animatronics and murdered children to being about family dynamics, systematic abuse, and psychological experimentation. It's where we see the Afton family not just as players in a horror story, but as a genuinely dysfunctional unit, where love and cruelty intertwine, where parents fail their children, where sibling relationships turn fatal. It's where the horror becomes personal and intimate, trading the security officer's professional distance for a child's bedroom and the trauma that happens within it. Whether you interpret the nightmares as Michael's guilt-fueled dreams, as deliberate experiments conducted by William in underground chambers, as the crying child's final visions, or as some combination of all these elements, the core horror remains constant. This is a story about suffering inflicted and endured, about innocence destroyed, about the weight of past actions that can never be undone. The nightmare animatronics, with all their teeth and claws and impossible proportions, are just the wrapping paper around this deeper horror, making it digestible as entertainment while still conveying the psychological truth underneath. If you've made it this far through this exploration, thank you for taking this journey into the shadows with me. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 rewards careful attention and thoughtful analysis, revealing layers upon layers of meaning for those willing to look beneath its surface. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the game's dark secrets, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content like this, long-form explorations of gaming lore that treat these stories with the seriousness and attention they deserve. Let me know in the comments what aspects of FNAF 4 you find most disturbing or fascinating, which theories you subscribe to, whether you think the experiments were real or the nightmares purely psychological, what you believe is in the box, or any other thoughts about this endlessly analyzable game. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 stands as a testament to how horror games can be more than just vehicles for jump scares, how they can explore genuine psychological terrain and tell stories about trauma, family, and guilt that resonate beyond their supernatural elements. It's a game that understands that the scariest monsters are often the ones we carry inside ourselves, the memories we can't escape, the guilts that shape our every action, the family dysfunctions that damage us in childhood and echo through our entire lives. The nightmare animatronics are terrifying, yes, but they're not the real horror. The real horror is why they exist, what they represent, who created them and why, and what it means to face them night after night with no hope of permanent victory, only temporary survival. As you drift off to sleep after this exploration, perhaps you'll think differently about those nightmare creatures with their rows of teeth, seeing them not just as monsters, but as symbols of deeper psychological truths. Perhaps you'll consider the tragedy of the crying child, a boy whose fears were justified all along. Perhaps you'll contemplate Michael's guilt and his quest for redemption, are wondering whether atonement is possible for irrevocable actions. Perhaps you'll ponder the unopened box and what it might have contained, the answers that were never given, the story that might have been. Or perhaps you'll simply rest, letting these dark revelations settle into memory. Another layer of understanding about a franchise that continues to surprise us with its depth and darkness, nearly a decade after it began. Thank you for watching. And remember, in the world of Five Nights at Freddy's, some nightmares never end. They just wait for the next night to begin.